If you look back there where Brother Stocking is, there's a mock-up of the mural, a color study that I did to prepare for the mural, and some figurines that are very delicate. They're antiques from Denmark from 1850 when Thorvaldsen, the sculptor of the Christus, when he died, they did an edition of these porcelain figurines. And I bought those about 13 years ago because where the original Christus is in Denmark, it's also with those 12 apostles in this cathedral it's called the Church of Our Lady in Copenhagen. So if you look at the tape on the floor, this red curve right here is the curvature of the wall that the mural will be on. So the mural will not be flat like you see it, and that's why the horizon is curved and the light rays are curved, because when you stand in the room, they will look straight because they're on a curved wall. The primary viewing angle, and really the whole purpose of this mural in my mind, is to be a support to your experience in front of the Christus. So the primary viewing angle is right over here where that orange tape line is. And the white tape represents the base that the Christus is standing on. I'll just put it in the middle there to show the height. So this is the height that the Christus stands in the room when it's on its base. The white tape below her hands is the height of the base. And then the Christus statue is 11 feet taller than that. So the mural will be 11 feet off the ground. And in fact, this scene right here is the height of the Christus in the room. So when this is on the wall, this will be the height of the Christus. Try to ignore the racket while I say a few things. You'll notice it's an Italian landscape, so everything in the mural belongs in that area of Italy. But it just so happens that Italy is a Mediterranean continent just like Israel. And so there's a lot, really everything in the mural could be in Israel and has gospel symbolism. Okay, if you look on this screen right here, this is how the mural will be seen when you stand in front of the Christus. So you can see how the light rays straighten. And this is how the Christus stands in front of it. You can see that his hands hover over the landscape. You'll notice on the right side are some stacks of wheat. They're called sheaves of wheat. When you gather in the harvest, you gather that wheat into these stacks. It's called being gathered in. And the gathering of Israel is often described as the gathering in the harvest. So at the last days, Israel will be gathered. And of course, we're part of that gathering of Israel. And I felt in the space that was an appropriate theme for the space, to be gathered in. You stand in a room that encircles you, and you stand in front of the Christus, who is in this gesture of embracing you as you come unto him. And so all of Israel will be gathered in. You see the 12 olive trees. There are 12 of those olive trees that represent the house of Israel, and the sheep are the people of Israel. You'll notice, you'll probably have to come up to see this, but this is the only lamb that is above the seam of the canvas. When the canvas is installed on the wall, it'll be installed in these two pieces, and then we'll cut the seam so that they're flush, and then I'll patch it with paint so that you don't see the seam. But it'll always be there, so I thought I would use it symbolically. So I put it where the Christus height is. And the ram of the thicket that represents Christ is right above that scene. If you know that story, Abraham was told to offer his son Isaac, but the angel intervened and stopped him. And instead, there was a ram caught in the thicket that was provided. And that's what was offered instead of Isaac. So Christ is offered instead of us. And that's why Christ is a symbol of the ram of the thicket, symbolized by the ram of the thicket. In the middle, you see these plants right here. Anybody know what kind of plants these are? They're like yucca. The aloe plants, yeah. Good job. And this one in the center with the stem reaching up that hits the seam, it's actually right in the middle of the painting. It's right in the center, just like the Christus is. And it's the height of the Christus, and it's symbolic of Christ, who reaches up to the Father. Yes, so the aloe is a symbol of healing, and thus a symbolic of Christ. Yes. Anyway, you see these lines on the ground to give you kind of a sense of scale, and to give us artists a sense of scale while we're painting it. This orange line right here is the center of the Christus base, and the orange in front of it. The three lines kind of represent a veil, as it were. If you look at the TV screen there, when you look at a painting, it's two-dimensional, but it's implying something three-dimensional. And that's kind of the power of art, is it represents something, and it translates it into this kind of different medium. And so it implies that it's three-dimensional, but it's only telling a story. But because it doesn't belong to the three-dimensional world, anything you see with your eyes could be at any depth, right? Like a camera taking a picture, it's just everything is flat in that picture. And we only understand depth because of scale. Things get smaller as they go away. But otherwise, in a photograph, everything is the same depth. So I wanted the painting to feel as if, instead of being behind the Christus, that it came forward to right where he was, so that when you saw it, it was as if he was coming through the painting or coming through the veil. And so I scaled, like the rings around the sun, for example. I projected what size the sun would be if you're at that position, and seeing it at a distance of that wall, and then I projected the sun forward to where the Christus was. Or in other words, I made it larger so that it would be at the same plane as the Christus. So those are just some tools that an artist might use symbolically to suggest what you should experience when you look at the painting. Any questions? Yes, Charlie. So I was asked to do it about 2 years ago, and then I waited for about a year to get more information that they were going to give me. But I did travel to Italy, started researching. I knew they wanted a landscape, so I started gathering reference in Italy, landscape reference. I visited the Rome Temple and experienced the space to decide how I should do it. And then they gave me the materials I needed to start composing back in December. And then I started doing sketches and developing the composition. And it went through a lot of stages of development and approval, and it ended up that it was built a different scale than what they had told me, so the canvas had to be a bigger size, and my composition had to change because the size changed. So all those things kind of contributed to 5 months of preparing. And we built the frame that the mural is on, can be lowered so that we can unroll the canvas when it's flat. And the frame was a doozy to build and all that stuff. So I didn't start painting until Well, this is our 8th week painting in color. And then I hope to have a few weeks in Rome, once it's on the wall, to finish it. Any other questions? Yeah, so there are 40 sheep total. And 40 is the number, if you remember the 40 being used in the scriptures, it's used a number of times. It's used in the law of Moses. It is, if you remember, the children of Israel wandered for 40 years in the wilderness before they went into the promised land. Christ fasted for 40 days. Moses was on Mount Sinai for 40 days. The child is in the womb for 40 weeks. 40 is the number of a complete preparatory period before you enter into a higher domain, basically. So Christ fasted for 40 days before his ministry started. So in the gathering of Israel, there's 40 sheep representative of sort of the test of this life and being gathered together in one. And then as you stand in front of the Christus, the 7 that are laying down are behind the Christus in his silhouette. So you don't see those 7. They've symbolically entered into the rest of the Lord. 7 is the number of the Sabbath day. So that leaves 33 remaining. So 33 is a number symbolic of Christ, as is 7. You'll notice that all the sheep are different breeds to represent the peoples of the earth. But the most common breed in the mural is the breed that was used for temple sacrifices in ancient Jerusalem, which is called the Wasi sheep. Oh yeah, so the ruins you see from the architecture, from ancient architecture, that's very typical in Rome. I don't know how many have been to Rome before. Okay, a few of us. So Rome is an ancient city. And there's something called the Roman Forum, where there's all these ruins of ancient Roman temples. And you'll see ruins just like this on the ground. So these are ruins from an ancient Greek temple. And they belong to a part of the temple that's called the entablatures, this horizontal beam above the columns. And it represents the place of offering, or architecturally, the place in between the below of the architecture and the roof part, the above. And so it represents this boundary between heaven and earth, or the place we offer our offerings and sacrifices. But you see that it's broken up, and it's broken right where there's a ram skull to represent that Christ has broken the bands of death and fulfilled that old law of sacrifice. So when you stand in front of the Christus, his robe goes right across that ram's head. And on the other side, it goes right across the ram in the thicket. On this side, you see a grape vineyard. And on that side, you see the haystack. So as he holds his arms out, on one side is the emblem, well, on either side is the emblem of the sacrament, the bread and the wine, just below his hands. So all of the mural, you can experience the mural as a landscape and just, a statement about light coming through the clouds and coming down to you. But as you stand in front of the Christus, that's where it all makes sense. So it will never again be seen without the Christus with it. It'll always be on that curved wall. And you can't even see, in the space, you can't see the whole mural when you're on this side of the Christus. You have to turn around. You can't see it all in one view. But when you go on the other side of Christus, that's when it all comes together. So it'll ship in about a week and a half. So it'll have about a week to dry. It is oil, yes. Yeah, so how do you transport something this size? It's on canvas, so it'll be rolled up in a tube and shipped as a large tube. Yeah, that's a good question. First, it has to be drawn out at this size. You grid it out because you can't see the whole painting at once. And then, if you're methodical about placement of everything, it's kind of whatever. I sketched in the ground, and then I started painting the color. I started with the sky, and began with the sky because that kind of established the atmosphere and the colors. All the colors we see come from the light. So the light establishes the color scheme in every landscape. So I tried to establish that before I did the landscape part. Oh yes, so the plants that are behind the ruins are called acanthus plants. And they were symbolic of the resurrection in antiquity. And so they were used in Greek architecture a lot. So they represent the resurrection growing just behind the architecture, representing a new life coming forth from the old law. Oh yeah, so she's asking about the stump that's next to the ruins. That's actually a Corinthian capital. Let me show you a picture real quick. So here are some pictures. Here's the Roman Forum that has the ancient ruins from antiquity, just outside the city of Rome. It's actually within the city of Rome, but anciently it was just outside. Forum means outside in Latin. So these are all ruins from Greek temples. And this is a photograph I took of that ancient capital, and I put it upside down to represent the fulfillment of the old law. But this is what a Corinthian capital looks like originally. And these are acanthus plants that are the origin of the Corinthian capital. And here are some photographs of the acanthus plants. Here's an altar from ancient Rome, from Caesar Augustus. It's called the Areopagus in Rome. You can go visit it. And you walk inside the altar where the offerings were offered. And here is sacrificial, in this case, an ox. Here is an ancient tripod where sacrifices were made. And it architecturally became this, what's called a triglyph. So offerings were put on these benches. And these triglyphs became part of the entablature right here. So that's what you see in the mural, is a broken entablature. Any other questions? Yes? No, I will finish it in Rome. So it's unfinished. What's that? I have 2 more days to paint it here, and I'm trying to get as much done as I can, because I don't know how easy it'll be to paint on site. But I should have a few weeks to work on it there. Let me just show you real quick. Here's a picture of the cathedral where the original Christus is in Copenhagen, Denmark. This is the front of it. Just like the Parthenon facade, you see it also has the triglyphs right here. Has Moses standing outside. And here is the Christus as you see it when you walk in the cathedral. So this is a photograph when I was with President Hinckley right after the Copenhagen, Denmark temple was dedicated. And the moment after this photograph was taken, he said, "Let me take one last look." And he looked at the Christus. And I was standing right next to a prophet of God looking at one of the great masterpieces in all of art history. And I was seeing it with artist's eyes, but he was seeing it with prophet's eyes. And that was an amazing moment to share with him. And right after that, I did a painting of the Christus, an interpretation of the Christus in a red robe, representing, of course, his second coming, when we will meet him again, and the red symbolic of the atonement. Here is the design of the Rome Temple. So the Rome Temple has a very interesting shape, different from any other temple. From the top view, you see it has this shape, almost like a football. That shape is called a Vesca Pisces. And anciently it was symbolic of when two separate things come together. And Christ is often depicted inside of a Vesca Pisces, because Christ is the one who brings together man and God, heaven and earth, justice and mercy. Here's a depiction of justice and mercy and Christ bringing them together inside of a Vesca Pisces. So the temple has that symbolism. It's geometrically, actually, this would be a Vesca Pisces, the standard Vesca Pisces. But then the architect made a Vesca Pisces within a Vesca Pisces. And of course, in temple symbolism, you have progressions. But the center of the architectural plan of the temple, right here, you can't see it in the plan, but this is the altar in the temple. So the altar is right at the center of the temple. And there's even a window right above the altar in that. So, anyway, it'll take too long to try to explain how the rotunda overlaps the temple space. But maybe I'll say one thing is this red circle that circumscribes the temple it's the largest circle or the smallest circle that encompasses the entire temple. That I calculated its measurement, and it happened to fit my perspective to make that horizon straight. So I used that circle on this for this horizon. The arc that you see on that horizon actually has a 1,000-inch radius. If you were to go down in the ground and measure that arc, it would have a 1,000-inch radius. And it's the same circle that circumscribes the temple, because the temple is the symbolic horizon. The temple is where heaven and earth come together. And anciently, to the Egyptians, the horizon was this sacred idea of the meeting place between heaven and earth. So that's what the temple is all about, bringing us together with heaven. So that I wanted something in the mural to correspond to the temple. So that's one of the things. Okay, well, thank you. Yes? Yeah, so you see these tall trees. These are called cypress trees. They're very typical of Italy. And pretty much you can't have an Italian landscape without having cypress trees, or it won't look very Italian. So it's very typical of Italy. But you'll notice, I have some slides on this, but I won't try to fish them out. But if you look at, there's a ray right here. The ray that goes up to the sun. This ray that goes up to the sun, and there's an equal one on the other side. Those rays come down from the sun at the same angle as the Pyramid of Giza. And the reason the Egyptians used that angle on the pyramids was it has a lot of symbolism about this idea of bridging heaven and earth. But you see that where the pyramids, or where the light rays hit the horizon, there's two prominent cypress trees. And they come above the horizon more than the other trees. So they represent a span that symbolically the pyramid, that would be like the base of the pyramid, right? Well, maybe I'll try to explain this briefly. When, if you see the Christus has his arms out like this. And the Christus, if you consider the gesture of his hands, the distance of his hands, as if he's indicating something. He's not just ready to embrace you or even ready to give you his atonement, but he's also indicating a measure. In other words, Christ said, by what measure ye meet, it shall be measured unto you again. Which means what? How you judge other people is how you will be judged, right? So whatever measuring stick you give to others is the one that you will receive yourself, right? So if you demand that people be very patient with you, then of course you'll be judged on that measure of patience. So what does Christ judge of us? Symbolically, if you reach your arms out as far as you can, your span, as far as you can reach, that's called your fathom. Your fathom is basically your ability to hug, your ability to hold something. And if you can't fathom something in math class, you, in a way, can't hug it with your mind. You just can't get your mind around it, right? So the fathom really defines symbolically your ability to know things and to be something and to measure other things, other people. So I guess I was trying to explain how the distance of those cypress trees, they have a measure that is related to the Christus and his outstretched arms, and also his fathom to our fathom. So, in fact, these lines right here that you see, they all correspond to a certain distance. Those yellow lines, by the way, are at the angle of a rainbow. So when you look at a rainbow and the sun is behind your head, you're seeing a rainbow out like this. You always see it at a certain angle. It's always going to be in the same place to the sun and your head. And it's always out 84 degrees from you. And so the angle that you see the mural when you're standing in front of Christus is the angle of the mural, or in other words, the breadth of the covenant. Yeah, so we did little studies. I had an artist team, and all my team did little studies of the sheep to prepare them to do their sheep on the mural. So we have little studies of sheep you might see around. But a mural and painting in general takes a lot of preparatory studies to prepare. I don't know if it will be. I have submitted the symbolism to the church, and so they have a record of it. They have asked me to summarize it for VIP tours. They want to have some short quotes about it and stuff. So I don't know how that'll end up, but I don't know if that'll ever be shared. Yes?
How many artists worked on it with you, or all?
Mary would know better than me.
About 25, I think?
About 25.
The olive trees and the different tribes.
That's a good question. So in the space, they correspond to the specific apostles right below them. They all line up with the 12 apostles that are just below the mural. So in some ways, they do correspond with those 12 apostles, which you could also make the argument those 12 apostles correspond to the 12 tribes of Israel. But I will just say the first tree is Peter. So Peter is the apostle that is the furthest one over here along the room. So it goes Peter, James, and John. You notice Peter is the biggest, sort of oldest olive tree representing seniority as an apostle. And the last one, by the way, is Paul. When Thorvaldsen did the 12 apostles, instead of putting Judas as one of the 12, he replaced Judas with Paul the apostle. So Paul is the one, if you look back here, he's the one holding a sword that is the furthest to the right. A lot of the apostles hold something that is an emblem of their martyrdom or their mission.
So they're progressively getting a little bit smaller, narrower, younger looking on the right side.
Kind of, yeah. I didn't want it to make it too overt that way. So really, Peter is the one that's most symbolizes the seniority idea. I kind of want to suggest a circle of olive trees that the sheep are within the house of Israel. The center olive tree that comes forward, if you know what the golden ratio is, it's positioned both horizontally and vertically to the golden ratio. Anyway. Okay, well, thank you for your time. It was great to have you.
As the Rome Temple and Visitor Center advance toward completion, a major benchmark has occurred within the Visitor Center. The installation of the marble statue of the resurrected Christ, which is an exact replica of the original Christus statue produced by Bertel Thorvaldsen in Italy before its placement in Denmark in the early 1800s.
One of the things that was important to us was to do something that would make this part of the country, but more importantly, for recognizing the Savior Jesus Christ. What more perfect symbol of the Savior and our belief in Him could we do than to bring that here to this place?
Also included in the Rome Temple Visitor Center are the marble statue replicas of the 12 apostles. These statues were digitally measured and fashioned to be precisely the same as the originals. Even the stone was cut from the original Michael Angelo marble cave in Carrara, Italy, before arriving in Rome.
And that's also part of the message of the whole visitor center here. We'll learn not only about Christ and the calling of the original 12, but we know that we have prophets and apostles today.
And from white marble to the gold leaf statue of the angel Moroni, the statue of Moroni that often sits at the top of Latter-day Saint temples around the world was hoisted and installed on the Rome Temple in late March.